Rain pounded against the windows of Rosie's diner, transforming the neon sign outside into a blur of electric blue and pink. Inside, the warm glow of vintage pendant lights cast honey-colored pools across the checkered floor. It was nearly closing time, and Melanie Freeman wiped down the counter with practiced efficiency, her shoulders tense from the 12-hour shift. At 26, Melanie's eyes carried a weariness that belied her age. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, stray wisps framing a face that rarely had time for makeup. When she smiled, which was often, despite everything was genuine, reaching her tired eyes. The bell above the door jingled, and Melanie looked up to see a tall man struggling through the entrance, holding the door awkwardly with his shoulder while maneuvering a wheelchair. In the chair sat a girl, maybe 12 or 13, with delicate features partially hidden by strands of honey blonde hair. The girl's hands were curled at odd angles, and her head tilted slightly to one side. "Welcome to Rosie's," Melanie called out, reaching for fresh menus. "Just sit anywhere you like." The man nodded gratefully, guiding the wheelchair to a booth near the window. Melanie noticed his expensive watch catching the light as he helped position the girl at the table. His clothes were casual but unmistakably high in the kind of understated luxury that spoke of real wealth, not just good taste. "Thank you," he said with a weary smile that suggested he wasn't accustomed to dining in roadside diners. "It's really coming down out there." "That it is," Melanie agreed, setting down the menus. "Can I start you both with something to drink?" "Coffee, black, please," the man said. "And apple juice for my daughter, if you have it." "We sure do." Melanie smiled at the girl, who was watching her with intelligent eyes that contrasted with her physically limited body. "Hi there. I'm Melanie. What's your name?" The girl's mouth worked for a moment before she responded, her speech slightly slurred but clear enough. "Sophie. I'm Sophie. It's nice to meet you, Sophie." Melanie's smile widened. "That's a beautiful name. I'll be right back with your drinks." As Melanie walked away, she could feel the father's gaze following her not in the way she was used to from some customers, but with something that felt like curiosity or perhaps surprise. Robert Kendall hadn't planned on stopping at the diner. He and Sophie were returning from a specialist appointment in the city, a 3-hour drive from their expansive home in the suburbs. The rain had started halfway through their journey, and Sophie had mentioned she was hungry. Robert had intended to push through to get home, but something in Sophie's voice made him pull off at the next exit. Since losing his wife Caroline to cancer 3 years ago, Robert had built his world around his daughter. The tech security company he'd founded had made him wealthy beyond what he'd ever imagined growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Detroit. But all the money in the world couldn't fix Sophie's cerebral palsy or fill the void Caroline had left. Now, sitting across from his daughter in the vinyl booth, Robert felt a familiar tightness in his chest of pressure being everything to someone who depended on him completely. His phone buzzed again. The merger negotiations were at a critical point, and his team needed immediate decisions. When Melanie returned with their drinks, Robert was already scrolling through emails. She placed Sophie's apple juice in front of her, complete with a bendy straw and a small paper umbrella that wasn't standard issue. "Something special for you," she said to Sophie with a wink. "Because it's raining outside, but that doesn't mean we can't have a little sunshine in here." Sophie's face lit up with delight, her body relaxing momentarily as she reached for the glass. The movement was jerky, uncoordinated. The glass wobbled dangerously. "I've got it, sweetheart," Robert said, looking up from his phone and reaching out to steady the glass. "Would you like some help?" Melanie asked Sophie directly, not speaking over her head to Robert as so many people did. Sophie nodded, and Melanie helped guide the straw to her lips, her movements natural and respectful, maintaining Sophie's dignity while providing just enough assistance. "Are you folks ready to order?" Melanie asked after Sophie had taken a few sips. Robert's phone buzzed again. "I'm sorry I need to take this. It's important." He glanced at Sophie apologetically. "Can you order for yourself, sweetie?" Sophie nodded, but Robert could see the disappointment in her eyes. "I'll be back in a minute," he told Melanie, stepping outside under the covered entrance to take the call. Through the rain-streaked window, Robert could see Melanie sitting down across from Sophie, giving her full attention as Sophie slowly explained what she wanted. Not once did Melanie show impatience or discomfort with Sophie's halting speech. Instead, she nodded and smiled, occasionally asking a clarifying question, treating his daughter with respect that many adults fail to show. His call dragged on longer than expected, a crisis requiring his immediate input. When he finally returned to the table, he found Sophie happily eating macaroni and cheese, her favorite comfort food. Melanie had cut it into manageable bites and was sitting beside Sophie, her own tasks apparently set aside to help his daughter eat. "I hope you don't mind," Melanie said, rising when she saw him. "Sophie said it was okay if I helped her while you were on your call." "No, I thank you," Robert managed, surprised by the lump in his throat. "That's very kind of you." "Not kind at all," Melanie replied with a smile. "Sophie's been telling me about her art projects. She's quite the conversationalist." Sophie beamed, a spot of cheese sauce on her chin. "Melanie used to be a nursing student," she told her father. "She knows how to help people without making them feel different." Robert studied the waitress with new interest. There was something in her manner, a natural compassion combined with practical efficiency, that spoke of training beyond what was needed to wait tables. "I ordered you the special," Sophie told him. "Melanie says it's the best thing on the menu." "It is," Melanie confirmed, "though I might be biased since I convinced the cook to add more spices." As she walked away to check on another table, Robert noticed a slight drag of her left foot, subtle enough that most people wouldn't catch it. It reminded him of Sophie's physical therapist's explanation of how the body compensates for chronic pain. "I like her, Dad," Sophie said, reaching for her juice again, this time managing it on her own. "She treats me like a person." "You are person," Robert said automatically, though he knew exactly what Sophie meant. Too often, strangers spoke to him about Sophie as if she weren't there, or worse, spoke to her as if she were much younger than her 12 years. "A smart, wonderful person," he added, reaching across to wipe the cheese sauce from her chin. Melanie's feet throbbed as she carried plates to her last table of the night. The diner would close in 20 minutes, and then she would head to her second job as a night cleaner at the medical center. Sleep would come in the precious few hours between finishing there and starting back at the diner for the breakfast shift. 3 years ago, she had been in her second year of nursing school, maintaining a 3.8 GPA while working part-time. Then came the accident, a drunk driver plowing through a red light, leaving Melanie with a shattered pelvis and mounting medical bills. Her insurance had covered only a portion of the costs, and her savings had evaporated within months. Student loans went into forbearance, then default. The dream of finishing her nursing degree faded with each passing month. Now, she worked 7 days a week across multiple jobs, trying to stay afloat while sending what little she could to her mother in Cleveland, who was raising Melanie's younger sister. As Melanie brought the check to the man and his daughter, she noticed that Sophie had grown tired, her head nodding slightly. "Long day, huh?" Melanie said softly to Sophie. Sophie nodded. "The doctor always makes me tired. Too many tests." "I understand that," Melanie replied. "I used to feel the same way after physical therapy." The man, Robert, she'd gathered from their conversation, looked up sharply. "You've had physical therapy?" Melanie nodded. "Car accident 3 years ago. Broke quite a few parts of me." She kept her tone light, aware of Sophie listening. "All better now, though some days are better than others." Robert nodded thoughtfully, then pulled out his wallet. When Melanie returned with his credit card and receipt, he had already helped Sophie back into her wheelchair and was preparing to leave. "Thank you for your kindness to my daughter," he said, his voice low. "It means more than you know." "She's a wonderful girl," Melanie replied honestly. "You should be proud." As they left, Melanie began clearing the table. Under the plate, she found a folded $100 bill. She stared at it in disbelief. The amount was more than 5 times the cost of their meal. For a moment, she considered running after them to return it, thinking it must be a mistake. But a glance outside showed their car already pulling away. Melanie slipped the bill into her pocket, thinking of the past-due electric bill waiting at her apartment. Sometimes the universe offered small kindnesses when you least expected them. 2 weeks passed. Melanie had worked 36 days straight without a break when her ancient car finally gave up, smoke billowing from under the hood as she tried to start it after her diner's shift. The repair estimate was more than the car was worth. Without transportation, she would lose her night job at the medical center, a 15-minute drive, but a 90-minute walk. The carefully constructed house of cards that was her financial life began to collapse. On her third day of walking to the medical center, she arrived to find her supervisor waiting with a concerned expression. "I'm sorry, Melanie," he said, not meeting her eyes. "We've had to reassign your hours. Corporate sent down new efficiency guidelines." The words were a thinly veiled excuse, and they both knew it. Her tardiness, despite her best efforts, had made her expendable. That night, Melanie walked home in the cold, calculating how many months it would take to save enough for even a used car while paying rent and utilities. The math was impossible. She would need to find another job immediately or risk eviction. The next morning at the diner, Melanie moved through her tasks mechanically, the weight of worry making her movements sluggish. She was refilling the sugar dispensers when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up to see Sophie's bright face as Robert wheeled her in. Sophie waved excitedly. "Melanie, we came back to see you." Melanie's fatigue momentarily lifted. "Well, hello there. What a wonderful surprise." They took the same booth by the window. This time, Robert didn't touch his phone once during their meal. Instead, he watched intently as Melanie and Sophie chatted easily, Sophie sharing news about her art project winning a prize at school. When Melanie brought their check, Robert cleared his throat. "Melanie, may I ask you something?" "Of course," she replied, wondering if she had forgotten something. "Do you have a few minutes to sit down with us?" "When you're not busy." Melanie glanced around the nearly empty diner. "I can take my break now if you'd like." She slid into the booth across from them, curiosity mingling with a vague sense of apprehension. Robert studied her for a moment before speaking. "Sophie hasn't stopped talking about you since our visit. She said you were kind and didn't make her feel different." Melanie smiled at Sophie. "That's because she isn't different in any way that matters." Robert nodded, as if she confirmed something. "Sophie mentioned you were a nursing student once. Is that true?" "I was," Melanie confirmed. "I had to leave in my second year after an accident. Do you miss it?" The question caught her off guard with its directness. "Every day," she admitted. "But sometimes life has other plans." Robert leaned forward. "Melanie, I'll be direct. I'm looking for someone to help with Sophie's care, someone who understands medical needs, but also sees Sophie for who she is. Would you be interested in discussing a position with us?" Melanie blinked, certain she had misheard. "I'm sorry. I run a technology company," Robert explained. "I've been trying to balance work with being there for Sophie, but I'm failing at both. We've had 3 care assistants in the past year, but none of them connected with Sophie the way you did immediately." Melanie looked at Sophie, who was watching her with hopeful eyes. "Please say yes," Sophie said. "You make me feel normal." I don't know what to say," Melanie stammered. "I don't have my nursing degree. I'm not qualified." "You're exactly qualified," Robert interrupted gently. "The medical skills can be taught. What can't be taught is the way you naturally respect Sophie's dignity while helping her. That's what I'm looking for." He slid a business card across the table. "If you're interested, call this number tomorrow. We can discuss details, salary, and arrangements. It would be a live-in position with your own suite in our home." Melanie looked down at the card. "Robert Kendall, CEO, Sentinel Security Systems." Her mind raced, calculating what such a position could mean: no more 80-hour weeks spread across multiple jobs, the possibility of saving money, perhaps even returning to school someday. "You don't have to decide now," Robert said, rising and helping Sophie back into her wheelchair. "Just think about it." After they left, Melanie sat holding the business card, wondering if she had imagined the entire interaction. It seemed too perfect, too much like the plot of a movie rather than her actual life. But the card was real, its embossed letters catching the light from the diner's overhead lamps. For the first time in 3 years, Melanie felt a tiny spark of hope. The Kendall home was unlike anything Melanie had ever seen outside of magazines. Nestled on 5 acres of wooded property, The modern mansion featured floor-to-ceiling windows that brought the outdoors in. What struck Melanie most, however, was how the entire home had been thoughtfully designed to be accessible for Sophie. With wider doorways, ramps blended seamlessly into the architecture, and an elevator disguised as a design feature. "This is your suite," Robert said, opening a door to reveal a spacious apartment within the home. Bedroom, bathroom, sitting area, and a small kitchenette if you want privacy. Melanie stepped inside, overwhelmed by the space larger than her entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a garden where late autumn flowers still bloomed. The furnishings were simple but elegant, nothing flashy or ostentatious. "This is too much," she managed. "It's been sitting empty," Robert replied matter-of-factly. The house was designed with live-in help in mind. Caroline, my late wife, thought of everything when we built it. For the first time, Melanie noticed the subtle signs of a woman's absent spaces on shelves where photos might have been removed, a vase of flowers that seemed like an afterthought rather than a regular habit. "I'm sorry about your wife," Melanie said softly. Robert nodded, his expression momentarily vulnerable before he composed himself. 3 years ago. Cancer. Sophie was 9. Melanie's heart ached for them both. That must have been incredibly difficult. "It still is," Robert admitted. "But we keep going for each other." He showed her the rest of the house, explaining Sophie's routine, her medical needs, and the various therapies she received. Melanie listened carefully, mentally cataloging everything while asking clarifying questions based on her nursing knowledge. When they reached Sophie's room, the girl was waiting eagerly, surrounded by art supplies. "I made this for you," Sophie said, holding up a colorful drawing. "It's you and me at the diner." Melanie accepted the drawing with genuine appreciation. 2 figures sat at a table, one clearly Sophie in her wheelchair, the other a smiling woman with dark hair. Above them both, Sophie had written in careful letters, "My friend Melanie, this is beautiful. Sophie, thank you." Melanie felt her eyes growing moist. "I'll keep it forever." "Does that mean you're staying?" Sophie asked hopefully. Melanie looked from Sophie to Robert, who was watching them with an unreadable expression. "Yes," she found herself saying. "I'm staying." The transition wasn't without challenges. Melanie had lived independently for years, and suddenly being in someone else's home, especially one of such wealth, felt strange. Robert was often distant, buried in work in his home office, emerging mainly for meals with Sophie. Sophie, however, blossomed under Melanie's care. Melanie incorporated elements of her nursing training into their daily routine, adding gentle stretches and exercises that complemented Sophie's formal physical therapy. She discovered that Sophie had a talent for painting and found ways to adapt tools to make it easier for her to express her creativity. Gradually, Melanie began to understand the dynamics of the household. Robert was a devoted father, but carried immense guilt for working too much, for not being able to fix Sophie's condition, for surviving when Caroline had not. His wealth isolated him as much as it privileged him, making him wary of people's motivations. One evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, Melanie found Robert in the kitchen, staring at a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. "Is everything all right?" she asked hesitantly. Robert looked up, seeming surprised to find her there. "Just thinking. Sophie seemed happy today." "She was," Melanie confirmed, taking a seat across from him. "She mastered a new painting technique we've been working on." "You've made a difference," Robert said quietly. "In just a few weeks, she's more confident, more willing to try things." "Sophie's amazing," Melanie replied. She just needed someone who understood her capabilities rather than focusing on her limitations. Robert studied her for a long moment. "Why didn't you go back to nursing school? After your accident?" The directness of the question caught Melanie off guard. "Money," she admitted finally. "The accident drained my savings. My insurance didn't cover everything. I had to work to survive, and then my loans went into default. It became impossible. What would it take to go back?" Melanie gave a small laugh, though there was no humor in it. "A miracle? Paying off the defaulted loans, covering tuition, having enough for living expenses while studying. And if those obstacles were removed?" Melanie stopped, realizing what he was suggesting. "Mr. Kendall." "Robert," he corrected. "Robert." I can't accept that kind of charity. It wouldn't be charity, he said, leaning forward. It would be an investment in Sophie's future as much as yours. I don't understand. Sophie needs consistency. Someone who will be there for her long term. If completing your nursing degree would make you more fulfilled, more likely to stay with us, then it benefits all of us. He paused. We could adjust your schedule so you could take classes. Eventually, you could work part-time with Sophie and part-time in your nursing career. Melanie felt dizzy with the possibility. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, Robert replied, finally taking a sip of his whiskey. That's all I ask. The first real crisis came 3 months into Melanie's employment. Sophie woke in the night with a high fever, her body racked with spasms more severe than her usual muscle contractions. Melanie found her breathing rapidly, her skin hot to the touch. Robert, she called, already moving to lower Sophie's blankets and assess her condition. Her nursing training kicked in automatically as she checked Sophie's pulse and respiration. Robert appeared in seconds, his face pale with fear. What's happening? She has a high fever, Melanie explained calmly, though her heart raced. I need to know if she's had seizures before. Not since she was very young, Robert said, his voice tight. Should we call an ambulance? Melanie made a quick decision. Let's try to bring her fever down first. Get me some lukewarm water and washcloths. And her medication list, I need to check for interactions. While Robert hurried to comply, Melanie spoke soothingly to Sophie, who was semi-conscious but frightened. You're going to be okay, sweetheart. We're right here with you. Over the next hour, they worked together, Melanie directing, Robert following her instructions with focused intensity. Gradually, Sophie's fever began to subside, her breathing steadied, and she drifted into a more normal sleep. When the crisis had passed, Robert and Melanie sat on either side of Sophie's bed, watching her sleep peacefully. You knew exactly what to do, Robert said quietly. If you hadn't been here. But I was, Melanie replied. And you were amazing, too. Perfect teamwork. Robert reached across the sleeping girl and briefly squeezed Melanie's hand. Thank you. In that moment, something shifted between them, a deeper trust, a recognition of shared purpose. They weren't just employer and employee. They were two people who cared deeply about the child sleeping between them. Spring arrived, bringing with it new routines. Melanie had enrolled in online nursing courses to complete prerequisites for returning to her degree program. Sophie was thriving, her artwork increasingly sophisticated, her physical strength improving with the consistent therapy Melanie provided. Robert, too, was changing. He worked fewer hours, joined them for meals more regularly, and had begun taking Sophie to the park on Sundays, something he had previously considered too difficult to manage alone. One sunny afternoon, Melanie found Robert in his study, surrounded by papers. Sophie's having her nap, she reported. Is there anything you need before I start my study time? Robert gestured to a chair. Actually, I'd like to talk to you about something. Melanie sat, noticing the unusual energy in his manner. I've been thinking about what you said about your nursing school, he began, about how financial barriers keep many talented people from completing their education. Melanie nodded, unsure where this was headed. I'm starting a foundation, Robert continued. The Caroline Kendall Foundation for Healthcare Education. It will provide scholarships and living stipends for nursing students who have faced financial hardships or personal setbacks. That sounds wonderful, Melanie said sincerely. What a beautiful way to honor your wife. You inspired it, Robert admitted. Your dedication to Sophie, your natural healing instincts. I keep thinking about how many other Melanies are out there, people with gifts that the world needs, stopped only by a lack of funds. He slid a folder across the desk to her. You'll be our first recipient. A full scholarship to complete your nursing degree, plus a living stipend. Your schedule with Sophie will adjust as needed for your classes. Melanie opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside was formal documentation of the scholarship, along with acceptance papers from the nursing program she had been forced to leave years ago. How did you? I made some calls, Robert said, a hint of self-consciousness in his voice. I hope you don't mind. The dean was quite impressed with your previous academic record. Tears filled Melanie's eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already have," Robert replied softly. "By seeing Sophie really seeing her. By showing her that her life isn't limited by her physical challenges. By reminding me that there's more to life than work and worry." Melanie smiled through her tears. "We're quite a team, aren't we? The three of us." Robert's expression softened in a way she'd rarely seen. "Yes," he agreed. "We are." 1 year later, Melanie stood at the podium in her nursing school graduation ceremony, delivering the student address. In the audience, Sophie sat beaming in her wheelchair, a congratulations sign decorated with hand-painted flowers propped on her lap. Beside her, Robert watched with undisguised pride. "Life rarely follows the path we expect," Melanie told the assembled graduates and families. 3 years ago, I thought my dream of becoming a nurse was over. A car accident, mounting medical bills, and the daily struggle to survive seemed to close that door forever. She paused, her gaze finding Sophie and Robert in the crowd. But sometimes when one door closes, another opens, even if that door happens to be the entrance to a diner on a rainy night. Gentle laughter rippled through the audience. "What I've learned is that healing isn't just about medicine. It's about seeing people for who they truly are, recognizing their worth beyond their conditions or circumstances." After the ceremony, as they celebrated with cake in the garden of the home that had become truly "There's a family created not by blood, but by choice and circumstance," Melanie reflected on how much had changed. Sophie, now 13, had progressed remarkably in her physical abilities. Her artwork had been featured in a special exhibition for young artists with disabilities. She had friends who visited regularly. The house no longer a fortress of isolation, but a place of warmth and inclusion. Robert had transformed too, delegating more of his work responsibilities to focus on the foundation, which had already helped 12 nursing students return to school. The grief that had once shadowed his eyes had eased, replaced by a quiet contentment. And Melanie, she had her nursing degree at last and a part-time position at the Children's Hospital, specializing in care for patients with cerebral palsy and similar conditions. But more than that, she had found her place in the world, with people who valued her not just for what she could do, but for who she was. As evening fell, the three of them sat together on the patio, watching fireflies begin to dance above the garden. Sophie's head rested against Melanie's shoulder, her breathing deep and even in sleep. Robert reached over, his hand finding Melanie's in the gathering darkness. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" she asked. "For feeding my daughter when I couldn't. For showing us both how to live again." Melanie smiled, thinking of that rainy night at the diner, how close she had come to calling in sick, how easily their paths might never have crossed. A chance encounter that had changed 3 lives completely. "No," she said, squeezing his hand. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible to everyone else." In the gentle spring darkness, surrounded by the family they had built together, Melanie knew with absolute certainty that sometimes life's greatest blessings arrive in the most unexpected moments, like a rainy night at a small roadside diner, where a simple act of kindness opened the door to a future none of them could have imagined. *Hey, beautiful souls. Thank you so much for watching today's story about Melanie, Robert, and Sophie. Their journey reminds us that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change lives in ways we never anticipate. Every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about, and a moment of genuine compassion might be exactly what they need.